It's my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker this afternoon. He's an author, Army veteran, CEO of the Robin Hood Foundation, a passionate speaker, as you're going to find out in just a moment, and just an inspiration to us all. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Wes Moore. Cover it.
Hey everybody, it is such an honor to be with you today, and I'm just so grateful for the chance to stand shoulder to shoulder with all of you at the Orangewood Foundation because of the fantastic and remarkable and truly important work that you all do. Chris, your leadership is spectacular, and we're also grateful for your vision, and to your board chair, Greg Dunlap, thank you for really helping to spearhead and steer the entire organization. And I'd be remiss if there weren't a couple other people that I wanted to acknowledge. One is Joe and Sonia Lozuski. Congratulations on receiving your award. And to our fantastic youth speaker, Onika. Thank you. Thank you for inspiring and blessing us all. You know, and I think about the work that you all continue to do here at the Orangewood Foundation, where for close to 40 years, you have fought for those who need and deserve a champion. You have fought for those who, in many cases, people have not thought about or acknowledged. You've thought about those who, in many cases, many situations, and in many scenarios, were wondering if anyone even noticed. Talking about children, talking about families, talking about people, talking about foster care, young people who, whether they were aging out or whether they're going through their own process of maturity, oftentimes you think to yourself, do people even recognize my humanity? And for close to 40 years, you all have answered with a resounding yes. You've stepped up, you stood up, you fought, and you've always made sure that you provided a voice and a pathway for all of the others in our society. The Orangewood Children's and Family Center, when you opened your doors, when you provided not just shelter and support, but when you provided love, when you provided educational platforms, when you provided a place that let people know that they were seen and that they belonged. And think about how even just recently, the chance to expand the Samueli Academy, and you actually included now 7th and 8th graders inside of that flow. Your work matters. And I could not be more thankful to stand here and applaud you and to say we, all of us in our society, are really grateful. You know, and I remember going through the process of writing the book, The Other Wes Moore, and by the way, that was my my first book, and in fact, I remember even thinking about the cover and the title and all that kind of stuff, and I didn't realize that when you look at the contract for this stuff for a book that's published, that if everything on the inside of a book, the writing, the structure, all that kind of stuff, that is the choice of the author. Everything on the outside, the cover, the title, the airbrushed author photos, that's the choice of the publisher. And so I didn't understand that at first, and I thought publishers actually cared about what authors wanted. And I remember when they called me up and they said, we want to have a conversation with you about the title of your book. I thought to myself, wow, conversation actually meant the English definition of the word conversation, which meant we would bat ideas back and forth. I had no idea that this was them telling me what the new title of my book was going to be. So I went prepared with all these different title ideas. And they finally came up to me and they were like, and I told them, they're like, and I cut them off and I said, hey, I love, these are different title ideas and like 6 of them. And they looked at me and they smiled and they said, it's very kind of you, but we think we have a better idea. And they said, what do you think about The Other Wes Moore? And I said, I think that's the dumbest book title that I've ever heard in my life. And they said, what don't you like about it? And I said, there's a whole bunch of things, but let me start with 3. First thing I told him was I didn't like that book title because I wanted to make it clear this story was about much more than just 2 kids. So by putting the name inside of the title of the book, you're not completely negating that entire fact, right? That's one. Second thing I told him I didn't like about it. What self-respected author do you know that puts their own name inside of a title of a book that they have written? No one does that, and it sounds ridiculous. The other J.K. Rowling, the other James Baldwin, the other Stephen King. It doesn't make sense. And the third thing that I told mine like about it, what self-respected author do you know not only puts their name inside of the title of the book, but also assumes that anyone knows who Westmore is in the first place. And if people don't know who one Westmore is, they definitely don't know who the other Westmore is. And so they looked and they smiled and they said, those are actually all really good points. And they said, the problem though, is that you're missing the point. Because you're absolutely right. It's not about you. And it's not about him. That the name is completely irrelevant. You can throw any name inside of that book title. It really does not matter, because the truth is there are Westmores that exist in every one of our societies, every one of our schools, every one of our homes. That the most important thing is not the name. The most important thing is the other. And that our society is full of others. People who might come from a different background. People who are our beautiful foster and community youth, who are just looking for an opportunity to reach their greatest potential, an opportunity to thrive and to prosper, but who oftentimes feel like they're not seen in that conversation. That the most important thing about the title is not the name. The most important thing about the title is the other. And oftentimes when people talk about my journey and my platform, people will distinguish between, well, it's about this intervention or that intervention. It's about you got sent to this school or that situation, whatever the case might be. And the reality is that while there were certain individual things that mattered, fundamentally what happened was this. At some point, you realize that you're seen. At some point, you realize that expectations matter more than anything else. I remember once when I was speaking with the other Westmore, who is this other young man who I profiled in this story, where around the same time that I was receiving a Rhodes Scholarship, the Baltimore Sun, which is my hometown paper, wrote this article about this local kid who did receive this scholarship. And at the same time was talking a bit about my childhood. They're talking about the fact that I only have 2 memories of my father. And how the second memory was when I was about 4 years old and he died in front of me. And it talked about how my mom was having a really difficult time with that transition. And as difficult as I thought I had it, or my sisters had it, I have a 6-year-old sister who's 6 years older than me, and a younger sister who was just 14 months younger than me. How the person who really had it toughest was my mom. And she had us go live with my grandparents because she was having a really difficult time with the transition, and they lived up in the Bronx, up in the South Bronx in New York. And how almost immediately as I got up there, I found myself getting lost. How I found myself hurting people that actually loved me so I could impress people that could care less about me. Picking and choosing which days were worthwhile to go to school and which ones weren't. By the time I was 11 years old was the first time that I felt handcuffs on my wrists. And by the time I was 13, I found out that when my mom makes threats, that she's not kidding. And she actually ended up sending me away to a military school when I was 13 years old. She'd been threatening me ever since I was 8. And every time she threatened me, I'd look and I'd say, all right, mommy, I know I'm gonna work harder. I'm gonna get it together. And every year I'd tell her I'd work harder. Every year I didn't. And finally, after years of threatening me, when she said, I'm gonna send you away, I would look at her and I said, mommy, I know I'm gonna work harder. And she's like, nah, you're going next week. And she sent me away when I was 13 years old. And while I hated every minute of that place when I first showed up, I literally ran away 5 times in the first 4 days at the school. In fact, they would catch me in the middle of the woods. They'd bring me back to campus. The second to last time I tried to run away was because they actually drew a map on how to get to the train station because it was so pathetic that I kept on getting lost. And they found me in the middle of the woods, and the map was actually fake. The map took me to the middle of the woods. They just enjoyed watching me do circles, and they wanted to see how bad I wanted to go home. And that night they got their answer. And people often say, well, that school was a thing that really helped to change your trajectory. And I'd be lying if I said anything if I said that school didn't matter, because it did. But it wasn't the idea that they made me do push-ups or made me wake up early in the morning. It was on this idea that we found ourselves, and then I found myself in a place where we knew that our destiny mattered to someone other than ourselves. We knew that our pathway mattered to someone else other than ourselves. And so when the Baltimore Sun is writing this article about this local kid who just received the Rhodes Scholarship, they were writing about these journeys. And at the same time, they're writing a whole series of articles about 4 guys who one day walked into a jewelry store. And the first 2 walked in the jewelry store with guns, and the other 2 walked in with mallets. The ones with the guns were keeping everybody on the ground, while the ones with the mallets were walking around and smashing out jewelry cases and taking out watches and rings and necklaces. And in this botched armed robbery, how as they left the store and they ran outside with a little over $400,000 worth of jewelry, one of the people who was inside the store was an off-duty police officer who was moonlighting as a security guard. And when he ran outside to see if he could stop the guys from getting away, he didn't realize that one of the cars that he was kneeling next to was one of the cars that the guys were in. And he was shot 3 times at point blank range. And when this manhunt began, that lasted 12 days, finally they caught all 4 people. And one of the people that they caught was a man who not only was from around the same neighborhood that I was from, he literally lived blocks away from where I lived when he was finally arrested. We were around the same age. We had similar pathways. And his name was also Westmore. And I decided to write Wes a note. And literally the note that I first wrote him was like, "Hey Wes, my name is Wes. Here's how I heard about you." And I was not expecting him to write back. And then about a month after I wrote that note, I got a letter from Jessup Correctional Institution from Westmore. And it was stunning to me because that one letter eventually turned into dozens of letters. Those dozens of letters turned into dozens of visits. I have now known Wes for decades, for almost 2 decades. And I remember having a conversation with him once where we were talking about Baltimore. And he said to me, he was like, I asked him a question. And I said, "So do you think that we're products of our environments?" Talking about Baltimore. And he looked back at me and he said, "Actually, I think we're products of our expectations." And as soon as he said that, I thought to myself, he is absolutely right. That we were not products of our environments. We were products of our expectations. And someone once said to me, "It's a real shame that you lived up to your expectations and Wes didn't." And I said, actually, the real shame is that we both did. We both lived up to our expectations, because the expectations that people have of themselves, they don't come from nowhere. The expectations that people have of themselves come from the expectations that other people have of them. And they internalize them and they make them their own. We live in this process, we live in this space where we know that the things that we see and the things that we experience when we're younger, that they will have a distinct impact on how we view the world later on, where early losses will condition you to believe that short-term plans are always smarter. That those losses, that pain, that knowing that the only way that someone can hurt me is if they're close to me, so my choice to deal with pain and not have to deal with pain is by keeping the whole world at an arm's reach. We know that we are dealing with young people who've experienced pain, in some cases, immeasurable pain at such a young age. Our ability, and truthfully your ability, to fight for them speaks measures about who you are. Your ability to make sure that we are putting the proper platforms in place and thinking about the holistic array of needs for people: education, health and wellness, housing, life skills and employment. The same exact processes that we know are necessary for all of our children, you make sure are being provided to all of our children. The same processes that we know work when it comes to supporting all of our youth, you make sure that they are then have the option of reaching all of our youth. So we know we're talking about not something that is for a set aside, but we're talking about something that is now, in terms of schooling, a gold ribbon high school. 96% graduation rate. 98% of seniors attending 2 or 4 year colleges. 96% attendance rate. That's not by accident. That's not just because. That's because this is an oasis of caring. And your work around this matters. Your belief in our youth, it matters. And it doesn't just matter to them. When we look at the contribution that they will make to our world, you will see that it will matter to all of us. And I'll close briefly. I had a colonel in military school, the one I was sent to, and he was a 3-time Vietnam vet, but he was losing weight really quickly at the school. And in fact, his uniform was so big on him that we used to laugh before we knew what was going on and say he looked like he was wearing his father's uniform, until we knew why he was losing weight. And one day he called the entire Corps of Cadets together, and he told us that he had to leave the school because he was diagnosed with cancer. That was the last time we saw him. And the speech that he gave was essentially his farewell address. But he said something to us that day that I will not forget. He said, when it's time for you to leave here, whether it's time for you to leave your school, whether it's time for you to leave your job, whether it's time for you to leave your neighborhood, or when it's time for you to leave this planet, make sure that it mattered that you were ever even here. Make sure that it mattered that you were ever even here. Because none of us are promised anything. And I think in the case of our youth, that we see, and we have examples all the time, at how unbelievably unfair life can be sometimes. So if we know that none of us are promised anything, we have to attack every day like it isn't promised. We have to attack every day knowing that your time here should matter, and it should matter to more people than just yourself. We have to attack every day with a belief and an understanding and a commitment to make this thing better than the way we found it. I could not be more grateful to all of you at Orangewood. Because what you continue to do and who you continue to fight for, it's not just saying everything about the world that you hope to see, but it says everything about your commitment in order to make that world real. I'm grateful for your work. I'm grateful to be your fan. And I look forward to finding ways to engage and work together for years and years to come. Congratulations. Bless you. And thanks for having me here.
Wes, thank you so much for those inspirational words. But Wes, we are not done with you yet, because right now it is time for me to ask Wes a few questions of my own. But it's not just going to be me in the Zoom room. No, one of our honorees today, Joe Lazowski, very moved by Wes's book, The Other Wes More. He wanted to jump into the Zoom room as well. It's going to be inspiring. It's going to be fun. And it's going to happen right now.
Wes, thanks so much for joining us once again, and joined by Joe Lazowski, who, of course, is the co-honoree. And Joe, you were honored earlier today, so welcome. I know that Wes's words were inspirational to you, so I know you have a few questions for Wes. But first and foremost, Wes, I want to thank you for the words that we heard earlier today. Your passion is infectious, and I found myself hanging on every word, and I truly appreciate what you do, your message, and what you're trying to get across, and also what you're doing for Orangewood here today. So once again, from all of us at the luncheon, thank you so much.
It's my joy, and honestly, I have had a ball spending time with you all. And honestly, and Joe, to you, congratulations. This is it's not just well deserved, but it's lifting all of us and lifting all of our spirits. So thank you.
And before I let Joe take the floor, because once he does, I won't get another word in edgewise from what I've been told. But I want to get to the book that you spoke so eloquently about, and the words Ubuntu. Am I saying that right?
Yeah,
When you're a
Ubuntu.
Rhodes Scholar and you went to South Africa, and that resonated with me, and I know a lot of other people in the audience as well. Could you describe what that phrase means and why it resonates so much with you?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Thank you for that question. Ubuntu really just means the basic elements of humanity. And when you see a person who's saying, I see your Ubuntu, it just means I see your humanity. And it's really powerful to me because I feel like so many of these things that are measures of division, so many things that separate us, so many things that cause conversations to go sideways, is basically because we are not expressing or sharing or recognizing that spirit of Ubuntu, that spirit of humanity. And I tell you, I mean, being in South Africa where I first learned about that was really powerful because I remember staying with my homestay family and the mother who I stayed with when I was living in South Africa, and they were a traditional Xhosa family. And they were telling the story about apartheid South Africa, and actually the reason that it was just her raising their children was because their father was actually eventually taken and they never saw him again. And I remember hearing these stories that she would share with me, and I would ask her, I remember one time specifically I asked her, I said, how do you forgive? Because she was the most kind, peaceful person. And I said, how do you forgive? And she said something very simple. She said, because President Mandela asked us to. And I thought that was just such a profound statement that she said, I can forgive because President Mandela asked us to. And it was Ubuntu on display. This idea that we could have watched this whole thing go sideways after the ending of apartheid, after, you watched, multiple groupings. And it wasn't even just about the Afrikaners and the Black South Africans, because even amongst Black South Africans, you had dozens of tribes incorporated in that. But it was Ubuntu that won at the end. And I've never forgotten that. And it's also been a bit of a guiding light for me.
Ubuntu, that's something that I think we all need to remember. And certainly it resonates more now probably than ever, especially in the landscape of the world and specifically the United States. As we bring in Joe, and Joe, part of the book, The Other Wes More, many parts of it I know resonated with you, but one in particular, when The Other Wes said, we are the product of our expectation. Why is that something that resonated with you and affected you?
First of all, Wes, I loved your book too. I literally could not put it down. I read it in 2 days. I just couldn't wait to hear how the story turned out. And so obviously it was a great success.
Thank you.
And the reason that statement resonated, that we are a product of our expectations, is because it's something I truly believe myself. I was very, very fortunate as a young man that I grew up in a family with a strong and present father. He was there all the time. And at the dinner table, he would always say, you're going to college. You better get good grades. And so as a result of that, that became my expectation. And I had 2 sisters, and we all 3 of us graduated from good universities. And so I think that those expectations are what formed part of my success throughout the rest of my life. But early in the book, you talked about the fact that you and the other Wes Moore grew up without fathers. And so to me, the real root problem of some of today's problems is that there are too many fatherless families. And I know this is a huge, huge problem across the country and something with not a simple answer. I'm curious, as a result of your research and your life, if you have any ideas as to ways we can affect fatherless families as a problem in the United States.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a massive challenge. Because not even just on the practical, the fact that we're now talking about a household that oftentimes will have, one income instead of two, and but it's also the emotional. It's the fact that that void means something, and oftentimes we have young boys and young girls who oftentimes fill that void with things that can be not just inopportune but dangerous. I think there's a couple things that we can do as a large society. One is we have to do a better job from everything from, building young people up from boyhood to understand what that process of manhood is. It was one of the reasons I was so taken when in South Africa, where, that process that my older homestead brother Zinzi went through was like this manhood process where they would take Xhosa boys out into the bush, and when they're around 16 years old, and the first thing they did was they circumcised them, and then they would spend 3 weeks healing, physically healing, but then also spending that 3 weeks as a group learning the stories of Xhosa man and what does it mean to be a Xhosa man. And so when you then came back into society, you were greeted as this idea that a boy left, but a man has come back. And you knew history, you knew your culture, you wore all white. The village came back and they celebrated you, that this man re-entered back into society. And so there was this process of actually understanding what manhood is. I think we have to, as a larger society, understand, the messages that we're oftentimes sending to our young boys, and how, we scream to our children what we expect from them without even saying a word, oftentimes. By just the water they are drinking, the air they are breathing, the schools they are attending, the neighborhoods they're growing up in, how they're policed. And so we can't pretend like our young kids, and particularly our young boys, are not internalizing that. And oftentimes that's why when you have young people who are coming up with their own definitions of what adulthood is, it might not be the definitions that we would want. I think the second thing that we have to do is thinking about what are the things that we can do to better encourage reintegration of families, supports for families, and I think about it even from a policy perspective, that there are certain things that we can do when it comes to, for example, things like ways we can come up with criminal justice reform efforts, and think about reentry efforts for people who are coming back from prison. I mean, currently right now as it stands, for example, if a person is coming back home, they can't live in public housing even if their family is in public housing. And if they choose to be with their family, then their family then has to forfeit the right for public housing. Like, these are adjustments that we can make if we're serious about the ideas of family reunification and why that's so important to be able to have unified family systems and structures. And I think then the third component really goes back to this idea of, if we do have a situation where a child, for whatever reason, is coming up in a household where the father is not there, that's not their fault, nor should it be something that they're punished for. And so our collective responsibility to help fill that void. I know right now there are people who entered into my life, whether it's coaches and ministers and teachers and counselors and mentors, who never ever tried to replace my father, but who played such a massive role in helping me to understand what it means to be a man. And I think we all have to take on that collective responsibility to be able to do that and support that for our young boys who are making this journey into manhood, and at times where they seemingly feel like they're making it alone.
Well said. And I think too, that resonates with me when you, in a speech you gave several years ago, you mentioned fight for those that need a champion. Also in your speech, our destiny matters to someone other than ourselves. And it's those people that you speak about, Wes, when you went to the military academy, and others, figures in your lives that were very influential and kind of put you on the right track. So that is extremely well said. It's so important. Well, let's talk about champions for a moment, gents. Almost champions. We're going to talk some hoop. And Joe, I know, Wes, in your book, you talked about the Fab Five and your love of basketball. And, oh, by the way, Joe just happens to be an alum of Michigan. And Joe, take the floor away right now. What do you want to ask Wes?
Well, so, Wes, I can't help but notice in the book next to yours, right behind you, you have the Fab Five book sitting right behind you there.
I sure do. I sure do.
That was not planned, by the way.
No, that was
planned.
not. And that's actually because
I
it's
know it
what
wasn't
influenced
planned,
my
but as I was
life.
listening to your answer, I happened to notice the book in there. So I love college basketball. I love it tremendously, and obviously went to Michigan, so I'm a big Fab Five fan. I'm curious if you've, through your travels over the years now, first of all, do you have a favorite player from the Fab Five, and were you ever able to meet any of those guys? I thought maybe you might have been able to.
That's such a good question. So I unfortunately I have never met any of them. And it's actually, I think one of the things that's so fascinating for me about the book was, that was really the first book that I read that book helped to turn me on to reading. Now I'm literally addicted to reading. But that was the book that really helped to kind of light that spark for me, because my mother knew I loved basketball and she knew that I hated reading. And so she said, let me see if I can find a book about basketball that can kind of turn them on. And the book that she got from the library was Fab Five. And I devoured this book. And I was literally defending these people like I knew them. When she would say, what about blah, blah, blah? I'm like, nah. Chris Jackson wouldn't do that. Yeah, no. But I tell you, I honestly, I think the question of who's my favorite, I think my favorite is still to this day, my favorite is Jalen Rose. Because not only was Jalen Rose just such a special talent. I mean, again, he was like this 6'7" point guard, and, just was so different than anything people had seen. But also, I really feel like he was the engine of the team. He was the one who knew just how to poke and prod to get the most out of his teammates. He was the one who I think really represented this rebellious spirit that I think spoke to me and so many of my friends. He was the one who first introduced the concepts of the bald head and the baggy shorts and the black socks and all this kind of stuff that was just so un-NCAA basketball. And we loved it. We absolutely loved it. And so I love the fact that he was so unapologetic. I love the fact that he was so brash. And he was like 19 at the time, which was so amazing. So I think I really feel like he was the engine. The whole team was talented, but he was the engine that made that team what it was.
And
We're gonna have another Zoom so we can talk basketball. Just all hoops, I think. I can sense the passion for you guys.
Back to Detroit, so I admire him a lot for everything he's done for the community as well. It's
Absolutely, his charter schools.
Been a great, big in charter schools. He's been great for the community as well.
Yeah. That's awesome. Go Blue.
All right, gents, as we wrap this up, Wes, I kind of want to just give you an opportunity, and I think all of us want to hear you speak just based on what's happening here in this country. There's so many layers, but really the question to you is, based on everything that's happening in this country, I think we're all aware of all the different things that are going on that are affecting us as humans. What gives you hope? What are you hanging your hat on these days that kind of keeps you going and gives you the passion to do and speak to these situations today?
Yeah, well, and first I want to just reemphasize just what I was saying earlier. You all, especially are on the West Coast, you continue to stay in our thoughts, because I know you all aren't out of the woods on everything. So I just want to say we're thinking about you. Honestly, I think one of the things that gives me hope is history. Because I know that we've seen hard times before. We've seen difficult moments. We have seen, there's nothing that we're seeing right now that hasn't shown itself in some way, shape, or form before. And the reason we are here is because there were people who didn't give up. The reason that we are all here is because there were people who kept fighting and who had to witness firsthand some of our nation's most horrific moments, and they kept fighting and they kept pushing. And so I think about the Dr. King quote where he says, the moral arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. But the thing that I always remember is that it doesn't bend towards justice just because. It doesn't bend towards justice because of gravity. It bends towards justice because there are people who are bending it. It bends towards justice because there are people who are pulling on it and making sure that that's the way it goes. And I just feel like this is our opportunity to be the benders. This is our opportunity to be the ones who are bending this moral arc towards justice. And I feel like history will judge us about whether or not in this moment did we step up, or in this moment did we just allow the world to turn without our fingertips on it. And I'm thankful to be around people who every day make sure that our fingertips and our fingerprints are going to be on this thing.
Well, Wes, we can't thank you enough for joining us and being part of this incredible event for Orangewood this afternoon. Joe, thanks for joining us. I know that once again, I'd love to hear your take and your how you've been affected by that book as well. And once again, we'll set up a Zoom call, just you and Wes, and you guys can chat through all you want. All right?
I love it.
All right, I'd love that. Okay.
Wes, and again, your passion, your words are infectious, and I hope that someday you and I and all of us can stand on the stage together and do this once again.
It'd be an honor. It'd be an honor.
All right, thanks again. Have a great one.
You too. Thanks, y'all.